Hey guys, welcome to Imminent Thread Solutions. I'm here with Kyle from Trident Response, and we're at the Ready Lab, anchored to the ceiling here, to show you some different alternatives and methods for an urban repel or setting up an urban repel. So Kyle, if you want to kind of give us a run through of what we got set up here.
Absolutely. So the first thing we have set up here is basically what we've done is we've hitched two pieces of webbing. It's tubular webbing. I know it doesn't look like it, but it actually is. It's a tubular that's been flattened. What we've done is we've tied a water knot to splice the webbing together. Now, a water knot is basically a follow-through square knot. You tie a square knot on one side, then trace it back through and come out the other side. And the idea behind it is the opposing force actually just continues to cinch and stitch without any sort of slip whatsoever. It's kind of the accepted method to splice a piece of webbing together. So from that, what you want to do is make sure that you find a nice solid anchor when available. We've chosen a nice thick I-beam that's actually welded and bolted. In a perfect world, this is the type of anchor system that you want to use. It's not always going to be a perfect world, so what you want to do is find the most bomb-proof looking piece of steel or any sort of piping that looks like it's not going to go anywhere. Go ahead and give it some good pulls. Look to see where it's coming from, where it's going, and if it looks acceptable, you can go ahead and sling it like we've done here. At that point, what you want to do is you're going to use two separate carabiners. The idea being that we've got two separate points of failure here. Now, granted, if this I-beam was to fail, that's another story. But we've got two separate pieces of webbing, one here, two carabiners opposing on different pieces of webbing. That way, we're always backed up. If one system was to fail, the idea is the other one would catch us. We have this set up for a double line repel. So in a double line repel, if you're going to be using your basic figure 8 or your friction belay device, this one happens to be an ATC. They make a number of different ones. What that looks like, and remember this is on a double line. On a double line, you need to make sure you have both ends of the rope. If you were to wrap down with just one end of the rope, you would actually plummet to the ground because you need the opposing tension on both sides. Now we'll talk about a single line here in a minute, but right now, double line, both ends of this rope. So you take a bite of that rope, you're going to feed one end through on one side of this device. You're going to feed the other end through on this other side of the device. And this part is really, really important. Go ahead and pull it out and check to make sure that this is what it looks like. At that point, we're going to make sure that our carabiner is going through both loops in the rope. You can tighten it up, tighten that gate. Always give it a little pressure test. Make sure we're good to go. Then you would tighten that up. You would actually unfeed from this anchor system that we have right here, which is basically two pieces of nylon sling. We've slung it around, attached it back to our belay loop. You stand up, unload the carabiner, take the weight off of it, then unclip, gently lay out, load this device, load the webbing, the anchor system, sit back in your harness, and then you would wrap down.
So walk us through some idea or some different anchor points. So I know we mentioned this is kind of the urban repel setting, so I know you kind of briefly touched on it, but give us some ideas of some other things that you could anchor onto if you were on the roof of a building or coming out of an office window or something like that. In
an urban setting, if you're on the roof, you have options, and if you get lucky, you have window washer anchors on the tops of the buildings. A lot of metropolitan areas, the buildings are built with the window washing anchors, so you're able to wrap down off of those. In a pinch, technically you could sling a piece of a building. You could probably even sling a skylight or an air conditioner. Again, though, this is a no other option sort of situation. This wouldn't be for fun. This wouldn't be for just a fun day out rappelling on a building. This would be, I got to get off right now, and this is my only option. But you could sling those. But again, anything that you sling, make sure that it's the sturdiest piece of the building that you can find. Don't, if you grab something like an air conditioning unit and it shakes a little bit, let's go ahead and not use that and look around and continue to find something that's a little bit better than that. I mentioned skylights. Skylights can be good because they're usually a structural part of the building. They're usually bolted down and framed into the building. Now, The downside would be if there was a lip on that building, you wouldn't want your anchor system to be anchored down here and then feeding up over a lip, because then you have the opportunity for that to slip. Now, when we're talking about slinging things like a air conditioning unit or a pipe or a skylight, you want to make sure that you girth hitch it. Now this right here is actually what we call a girth hitch, and the idea being that as it's tightened up and weighted, it cinches tighter around the object that you have slung. You don't want to just sling a rope around it or tie a loop in your webbing, tie your water knot and go that way, because that provides the opportunity for that webbing to start to work its way up and pop off of that if there's no cap on it. So if you're going to do that, and again I stress, this is in an emergency situation, not for fun, you would want to make sure that you tied some sort of girth hitch to where it was self-cinching, to where it would close and tighten tighter on that object that you're using as your anchor.
I wanted to mention too, Kyle runs the search and rescue program here for Trident Response, and he's pretty familiar with rigging this kind of stuff. This is why I wanted to kind of help him, or get with him to kind of walk through some of these options too. Now, what would you do, Kyle, if you didn't have webbing and things like that? I mean, could you just use your rope to do a double line rappel off something? So
in this instance, in this inside environment, what we could do, and we will demonstrate, is you could actually run the rope through this space in the corrugated metal on top of this I-beam. It's real important to know that that rope needs to be static, though. It needs to be sitting. You don't want to be running that rope on either side. You can see this has kind of got a shear factor to it. It's got sharp edges on both sides. Now the rope will withstand if it's just statically weighted and loaded and you're actually just coming down the rope. If you were to start running that rope to where it was sliding back and forth, you run the risk of shearing that rope and possibly cutting through a cord and falling to the ground, and nobody wants to do that.
All right, man. So we've got one option here. What are some other ways that you could rig up a rappel in an emergency?
Let's say you were in a hotel and you happen to have your kit with you, happen to have some climbing gear with you. If you're able to get that window out, bust it out, and you know you got enough cord to get you to the ground or get you within 20 feet of the ground, and you're looking for ways to anchor, one thing you can look at is busting through the drywall, finding some good studs in the drywall, doing a girth hitch, cinching it down the same way. You could do it with just your rope. Now technically we'll talk about some knots that you could use, but you could actually tie a cinching knot, do a single line, and you could just kind of shimmy down that rope. Now, again, I wouldn't recommend doing that 20 floors up, but in a third, fourth, or fifth floor situation, and if you had the gear with you, the quickest and safest way, if the stairs and the elevator are not an option and the firemen are not an option, would be to sling the studs internally in the wall of your hotel room. Make sure you get a good anchor system on that. I'd honestly probably back it up on 2 or 3. That way, if one was to fail, you have a couple other backups, and then you would just wrap down off of it.
Cool. Well, we wanted to kind of give you an idea of what it's like kind of being up here with these anchors, but we're also going to kind of come down and show you in person what some of this stuff looks like, as well as what this rigging looks like close up. So we'll be right back. All right, guys, so now we are off the rafters, and we wanted to come down here and kind of demonstrate some of the things we were talking about in principle while we were hanging out up there. So the first thing I wanted to show is how to do one of those, basically a water knot. So essentially what you want to do is just basically tie an overhand knot in a piece of webbing, and what we've got here is tubular webbing. And Kyle, if you want to kind of explain that there.
If you could see here, it's actually a sewn tubular webbing, so it looks like it's very, very flat, but it's not. When this is cut, generally it's melted together, so again, it appears to be flat, but it's actually a very, very, very thick piece of nylon webbing, and it is tubular, and you can see in this camera here, that's why it's called tubular.
Cool. So we've got more of that tubular webbing here, and first thing you want to do, as I mentioned, to tie a tape knot or a water knot, is to do that overhand knot, just like so. And roughly when you're finished with this, you kind of want a 6-inch tail in both sides, just for extra security. Would you agree? So,
absolutely, yeah, 6 to 8 inches is great.
Yep. So, and then what you're going to do is you take that other side of your webbing, and you're going to start to basically trace it. So you're going to run inside of that webbing, like so, and then I want to leave enough slack so that at the end, again, I'll have that 6 to 8 inch tail. and I'm just going to trace that through. So I'm basically following that same pattern that I had just tied, and that is a tape knot. So you want to talk on kind of what you were saying about the, you know, as you start to tighten the tape knot?
Yeah, it's you know, the good and bad thing is this is what you call a bomb-proof knot. This is a knot that's not going to come undone. As it's weighted, as it pulls, it just gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Now the bad side of that is a lot of folks, once these get really weighted, you're not able to get these knots out very easily. Sometimes it involves getting a flat piece of a screwdriver or grabbing it with some sort of plier to just get it started. Because again, once this cinches down, this is a knot that doesn't come undone super easy at all.
Cool. What's your opinion on as far as backing up those tails? Do you think it's necessary, or?
You know, it's always good to err on the side of caution. You can if you want. I personally will tell you that I generally don't when I'm out climbing just by myself personally or with my buddies. But if you want to, you can always come back in and you can tie some form of a fisherman's knot on here at the end just to be safe. Now again, this is a knot that cinches tighter the more weight that's put on. So it's not a knot that's going to come undone. It's not a knot that after the weight's taken off of it, it's going to start to feed itself and open itself back up again. It's just not that kind of knot. But again, in the interest of safety, if you want to tie a safety knot on the end of it to prevent this from coming all the way undone, that's fine. I'm always going to recommend err on the side of caution.
So again, once we had those tape knot slings basically that we created, those were girth hitched around that steel I-beam that we were tied into up there. So, and then basically coming to the harness, we were using slings, right? So if you want
so if you could see here, so these are just basic nylon slings. I generally keep mine daisy chained up so that I can kind of help with that length so it's not hanging down and I'm not tripping on it when I'm doing that. Now, the great thing about a girth hitch is you can just slide it through. It's a 1 carabiner proposition. And how this works, if I can show you real quick, is you're going to take this sling and you're going to feed it through both ends of where the belay loop attaches to the harness. So you're going to start at the bottom, work your way up through this loop, and then you're going to come up through this other loop, and then you're going to girth hitch it just like this. So you're going to pull it through, tighten it down, and what this does is 2 things. One, it's got 2 points of contact now, so when you're hanging from this, you're not just hanging from a sewn belay loop, which I like. The other reason I like to do this is it leaves my belay loop open to where I can see what I'm doing. If I need to attach other gear, if I'm about to wrap down off of something, I'm not trying to fight getting my webbing out of the way or getting other pieces of gear out of the way. I can keep my belay loop clean for what it's intended for.
Cool. So then we had those slings. Basically, we were kind of on redundant anchors, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Hanging from the rafters there. So another thing we wanted to demonstrate too is not only the difference between static and dynamic rope, but also wanted to show you some of the. This is an ATC. This is a figure 8. Wanted to show some different devices to rappel off of as well. So Kyle, if you want to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So we'll start with this ATC right now. So up there, what we did was it was a double line wrap. So what that's going to look like is we're going to load the 2 bites of rope. So there's one, and then there's the other. Now, on a double line like we did, why we did that was we doubled up the rope. There's no attachment point. Basically, the rope is slung between your carabiners. At that point, if you don't have both lines in there, one side of if you just had a single bite in this device, when you sat back, the other end of the rope would just slide straight through the carabiners and you'd come to the ground. So it's very, very important in the way that we demonstrated to do it, to make sure you get both bites of rope in this device. Now, the same thing applies when you're using these figure 8s. On the figure 8s, the way that you're going to load this, you're going to have your bite of rope, you're going to have your 2 lines. You're going to feed them through that big hole. You're going to then pop it underneath there, and that's the way that device is loaded. You want to clean it up just so you don't get a lot of friction on the rope, and that's what that looks like. Now on this, we didn't use a locking carabiner, which we always want to try and use on a belay or a Repel device. In a pinch, if you don't have a locking carabiner, let's say you've got 2 just regular gate carabiners, what you can do is put them into a pose. Now when I say a pose, what that does is if you were to squeeze these 2 gates together, it creates an X. Now on this X, The idea behind this X and this opposing gates is it doesn't allow the device or the rope to pop through, as opposed to a single carabiner where if this was to pop loose, this technically could slip out. Not sure how well that's coming through on camera, but that makes sense. You always want to, if you're gonna use two non-lockings, you want to make sure the gates are opposing so that they will actually block the device or the rope from feeding up through.
And then another thing I like to, just in my personal opinion, I like to stress that if you are using a locking carabiner, make sure you're screwing down so you don't screw up, so gravity is working to carry that locking device down rather than this way. So carrying it down that way would be technically loosening it. So.
And one thing on these locking carabiners, when you do lock them, it's a good idea to get in the habit of getting them locked down, and then once they're locked down, give it just a quick little, just an eighth of a turn back. What that does is prevents this lock from actually cinching down and being almost impossible to unscrew. So when I say just an eighth, you just barely give it a twist, then give it a squeeze, and make sure that it's still locked. It just has a little bit of that screw turn back on it.
And just to give you guys an idea real quick of the, we're talking about double line Repel. So if, again, what we were doing up there, we had that line coming through those two beaners, and now what you're dealing with is you've got two lengths of rope here that you're actually putting through. Yeah, so now you've got your ATC that you're hooking up to both lines and you're rappelling off both lines versus, so if this was on a fixed point, if you just hold that rope up there, now you've just got a single line that you're rappelling off of here. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna transition after we talk about different ropes, is we're gonna actually show you some ways to hook up a single line rappel too. So let's run through the, I guess, static versus dynamic.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start with the static first. So the static rope is kind of just what the word means. It's a very stiff, very static, no give rope. A couple of good things about static rope: they're very, very good to rappel off of. They are not good to climb off of. In fact, I would never recommend somebody climbing using this as their protection unless they had no other option. Now, there's two reasons. One, being static, it doesn't have any give, so that pop factor, that kilonewton rating changes quite a bit because there's no give in the cord. Let's say the cord does hold though in a fall. The other bad thing is it will yank your guts up into your chin. It's just it's a very, very stout, just no give rope. It's not something you want to take a fall on. The good thing about static rope is that you don't need to worry about getting wet, whereas dynamic ropes, there's a dry rope and a non-dry rope. So there is dynamic rope that you can get wet, but you have to be careful, because if you climb on a wet, non-dry rope in the rain, you're taking away against some of that kilonewton rating. So this is very, very good in water. You see this in rafting and things of that nature, because it holds up well in water. And it's great for rappelling, but it's not great for actually climbing on. Whereas a dynamic rope, and you're not going to be able to see this in the camera, and it's melted, but it's got a ton of these little dynamic cords in there. And this, depending on the length of the rope, it'll give anywhere from 7 to 10% the length of the rope. So if we're dealing with a 60-meter rope, you're looking at about 7% of that 60 meters is what it will give. Now, the great thing about that, it almost has like a bungee effect where it'll stretch, and that yanking your guts up into your chin factor isn't so much a factor with the dynamic rope, because it'll give and kind of bend down and then slowly pull you back up. Not like a bungee cord, or like if you were bungee jumping at all, but just enough give where it's not painful to fall on the rope.
Yep, so let's talk about some of the ways to hook up a single line rappel. All right, guys, so now we're going to demonstrate kind of some single line rappel tie-off techniques onto this big I-beam here. So this is to kind of simulate your big tree trunk or whatever have you. What are some things to keep in mind, Kyle, when you're looking for an anchor point like that?
In an urban setting, you're looking for something that's very, very solid. I mean, you can yank on it, pull on it a little bit. If it's, obviously this one isn't going anywhere, but this is a perfect example of a bomb-proof piece of urban anchor. This is a giant I-beam. It's concreted and saw cut into the floor. It's attached to rafters up above. This building would have to collapse for this particular anchor system to fail. So this is a great example of perfect anchor in an urban setting.
And then you were going to demonstrate basically what we did up there, which is kind of girth hitching. When we
girth hitch. So this is basically a vertical version of what we horizontally slung up there. So this is the same kind of material, same I-beam. Just imagine if this thing was laying on its side. What we did was we came in with a piece of webbing that was spliced together, girth hitched. And what I like about the girth hitch, and the reason we were using it up there, is as this is weighted, it cinches tighter. And it's also easier if you need to come off the girth hitch and get onto a Repel device. You're able to kind of slide up and take some weight off of it and get that carabiner loose from your belay loop and move on to your Repel device.
So, and then what we're going to do also is demonstrate a couple of different techniques to tie off onto a pillar or something like this. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is with a single line. I mean, obviously a double line, all you really need to do is come around this and go right into your ATC or your figure eight or what have you.
Let's show it real quick just so we make sure on the double line. So how that would look like if I was using this as my anchor point and I was loading a double line Repel, I'd feed the rope through both parts, make sure my carabiner was going through both bites of the rope. Then I'd clip into my belay loop, tighten it down, give it a little tiny twist back, make sure it's not going to lock on me. Then I'd be laying back on this, and this is how I'd be rappelling down.
So again, that's with the double line Repel versus single line. So, you know, if you need that full length of your rope and you are in a single line Repel situation, here's some techniques you can do as well. Now, one thing I want to point out too is that this is the dynamic rope, this isn't the static, so just keep that in mind. We're just using this for the sake of being able to see it a little easier than the black static line. So if you're coming around, one thing you can do, and Kyle, you call this the barrel knot?
Barrel knot, it's basically a fisherman's knot though.
Yep, so you're basically wrapping a few times here. Well, I didn't get enough slack here. Actually, I'm going to reverse this here like this. So you want to take enough slack in your hand here, and I'm actually going to be wrapping over my thumb. So I'm going to wrap like this, and I'm going to get about 4 wraps here. And then I'm going to bring this inside those wraps. Just like so. And now that's going to cinch up. And then you can come along with this tail, and you can actually back this up too. Just like that, just in case you need to. You want to talk about some of the, I guess, the merits of this, and obviously you need to cinch this up before you back it up.
And that's, you know, that's why I like this knot. If I'm in an urban environment, or if I'm going to sling a tree, and I'm just using that single line wrap, it's a cinching knot. There's a lot of the ways you could tie this. We talked about a couple off camera. One is to tie a bowline. The reason I like this knot versus any of the others is I can walk up, sling the tree, tie this knot, and then I can cinch it down. And once it's cinched down, it's not going to walk around on me. It's not going to move around the tree. I'm not going to end up with my knot over here. Once that thing's weighted and cinched down, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to remain where it is. So I like it for that reason, and I like it because it's fast. It's a quick, easy knot to do. It's a cinching knot. It's real easy to get undone afterwards. So I prefer this one. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. There's a lot of knots you can tie to Repel off of. This is just the one that I choose to use.
So another thing, as you mentioned here, go with the bowline. So another thing you can do, again, come around your object you're tying onto. This is just the way I tie here. So you'd back this up as well with the tail, but so as Kyle was mentioning, this, you know, it's got a lot of play. You've got this big loop now that you're dealing with. So as you mentioned, that's kind of the reason you don't like the...
Yeah, and it's not that it's an unsafe knot, especially once these are backed up. I mean, the bowline's a knot that's been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years as far as, you know, a maritime environment. Sailors for a long time have been using that knot. So there's nothing wrong with it. I personally like the other one. That was the way that I grew up tying them. But like I said, there's multiple ways to do things correctly. We just need to make sure that every way that you do it is going to be a safe way.
And that's really the underlying goal here, is that whatever you're doing, whether it be the urban environment or an outdoor environment, just make sure you're safe. And again, everything we're demonstrating here is not the way, it's a way. So just be safe out there, and hopefully you enjoyed kind of our walkthrough here with kind of rigging to rappel in an urban environment. So I'd like to thank Kyle as well as Trident Response for letting us come out to the Ready Lab and film this thing here. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to ask us any questions and leave any comments, and thanks for watching.